So we need to build the validate page that will check our login. I've given you some, but not all of the code for this. So on Blackboard, so your login page should be loading now. You should be able to get a similar looking page to this. So if you go on Blackboard, there's a document called Lesson 6, whoops, sorry, I turned on my monitor. Lesson 6 in-class notes. It's the third item in Lesson 6. Open up this document, and I want you to go to page 2. You can ignore everything else in there. We're really only concerned with what's on page 2. So page 2 looks like this. Okay. So here's most of the code for validate.php. Now you notice I've color coded it. So I want you to take a few minutes. Why do you suppose I've color coded it? What am I going to have you do with it? What do you think the different colors indicate? Yeah, they're different sections of the page. Does the page look like it would run like this?
No.
What do you notice about it?
There's no connection.
Yeah, things are in the wrong order, basically. So the first thing I want you to do with this file, you can talk to the person next to you. Try and put this in the right order. So drag and drop the section. So each color is a section. Okay, so the 4 gray lines, they go together. This part is in order, but each color should be in a different place. So take a few minutes, drag and drop, and then we'll go over it together. Once you think you have it in the right order, then we'll paste it into our code editor and save the file. Okay? So you can do it on your own, or you can work with the person next to you. Take a few minutes, try and get all this stuff in the correct sequence. Well, and there's one small error here where it says param int. These should both be param string. So you can change that for the password. That was just a mistake on my part. Sessions, because the session is automatically started on the server. What it really means is session connect. That would be a better name. The session already exists. We just want to access it. So we want to access the existing session by calling session start. So anytime we want to put a value into the session object or read a value out of the session object, we have to call session start first. What are we going to do next? So we're going to store the user ID in the session object. So we'll use the session collection, to built-in collection to PHP. We're basically here creating a session variable called user ID. And we'll set it equal to, so get the user ID from our query and store that user's identity in the session object. So now any page they go, so long as they keep their browser open, we can look in the session object and we know who they are. And what's the last thing we do now that we've stored their identity? Yeah. So we'll let them into the athletes page. So if we don't call session start, our session user ID is just going to be blank. Which on this page doesn't matter, but as soon as we go to the next page, we're going to check that session user ID, and if it's blank, the user is going to wind up going right back to the login page.
If it is an invalid login, then the result will be null, and for each will give an error. So,
Shouldn't be with this code, with count,
with count shouldn't be.
right? I took out the row count. We're using count of result.
Oh, so it's inside the account.
Right, so this happens inside, otherwise we get invalid login.
Is it incorrect to put session start before the HTML tag with OB start?
No, it's fine, you can put it earlier on. I just called it here because we only need it in the event that we found a successful login. So there's no real need to call it, but it's not wrong if you want to call it higher up. Will still work. Okay. So now we should get this result. If I put in an invalid login, I get that message. If I put in test and test, knows who I am, and I can come to the athletes page. Now this page is still public, right? I can grab that URL. We haven't changed anything here. I'm logged in Firefox now. I'm not logged in Chrome, but I can still get here. So we need a check on this page to make sure that our user is authenticated before we show them this page. Okay. So those are the 3 lines in that order. I'll put the code up on Blackboard for you shortly. I'll put everything we've done. Okay. The last thing I want to do is just add the code to our athletes page to change it from public to private. So we need a few lines on our athletes page to do this. So what do we need to do? A couple of the groups got it working.
Start the session.
Yep, so we're going to have to start the session to access the current session. What else will we have to do after we call session start, Daniel?
We'll have to make sure that there's a valid number in the user.
Right, we're going to check this variable whether we have a value in the session user ID. And if we don't, what are we going to do? Yeah, we'll just use header location to go back to the login screen. So we're going to access the session, we're going to evaluate whether that value is empty, and if it is, we'll take the user to login. We don't even really need an else. We'll just exit and stop the script after we call header location. So we need to add about 4 lines of code to our athletes page to make it private. So I'm going to go back to my athletes page. And at the top, very first line, I'm going to put on some PHP tags. What do we need first? Right, we need to use OB start because we might be redirecting here and we'll get a can't modify headers error. So we'll call OB start on line 1. So now we want to check if the user's logged in. So we'll call session start. I'll show you the importance of session start in a minute. I'll show you what happens if we don't call session start. So we can just use our empty function. And we're going to check our session variable that we called user ID. Right? If that variable's empty, this has to match exactly the variable name we used here. If we call it ID here, we need to call it ID there.
Actually, if that's empty, you get an undefined index error. They suggest you use this set.
Okay, I'm going to try it this way. So in this case, User is not authenticated. So we'll call header location. We'll kick them back to login. And then I'm going to call exit. Or maybe I want to return it.
Would a die work here?
We could try die. I'm going to try exit this way and see.
Exit's the same.
Yes. And now down at the very bottom, we're going to need PHP tags with OB flush. So I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom, and on my last line, we'll call OB flush to stop our output buffering. We may have to tweak this a little bit. We'll try it like this. So I'm going to re-upload my athletes page. Now I'm logged in already in Firefox. I can refresh it here. I seem to have lost my CSS somehow. If I go to Chrome, it kicks me back to my login page. So now if I log in Chrome, oh, it changed my CSS links. I'll just put those back. There we go. Now, we didn't add a way to log out, really, but how can we check and make sure? If I go to Chrome, I'll copy that URL. I'll close my browser. This will kill my session. So now if I go back to Chrome and try and go back in, my session's gone. There's no longer a user ID value in my session object. So I'm going to have to log in again. And I want to show you the importance of session start. If I take session start out, I'm going to comment out that line. And now when I refresh, it kicks me back to login. So it can't check that session variable if I don't call session start first. Okay, so that's a bit of a gotcha in PHP. In other web languages, we don't have to do this. In C# or ASP.NET, we can just access the session right away. We don't have to call session start or any similar function to use our session object. For some reason in PHP, we have to call session start first, or we can't connect or access the existing session. Okay, so now I can go back to it. So if we wanted to make our athlete page private, we would just add the same little script at the top. So connect to the session and check whether we have an ID in the session object, yes or no. And if not, we'll take them back to login. We didn't have time to build a log out page. It's pretty simple, but what we'll do is we can add log out to this in a few weeks. So what we'll do next week is our exam, then we have reading week. When we come back, we'll basically take this, we'll add log out. The other thing we're going to want to do with it is we're going to make a shared header and shared footer, and we're also going to look at modularizing our code, so taking our database connection and putting that in one file that all the pages can share. Okay, so our code is much more efficient. So we'll do all of these things our first class after reading week. Well, Lucy, John, and Jonathan are enjoying. When I did this last semester, one student said, "This is the best coffee I've ever tasted because I made you pay for it." So we'll do that, okay? So that's it for today.